Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Chris Flack.
Hey, thank you so much, and welcome everybody in our audience to today's webcast, New Approaches in Hardwareless SAN, Storage for Remote and Branch Offices, sponsored by StarWind. I'm Chris Flack with Redmond Magazine, and I'll be your host for today's event. Thank you all for joining. Just a few quick things before we get started with today's presentation and introduce today's presenters. Just a quick reminder that today's webcast is being recorded and archived for future viewing and listening purposes, and we'll send you a link to the email you registered with within 24 to 48 hours after today's webcast. Please feel free to share that link with coworkers, colleagues, and friends who may be interested on today's call. We'd really appreciate that. Also, today's webcast will have a Q&A. However, we do encourage you at any time during the presentation to enter your question via the Ask a Question box appearing on the left-hand side of your console. And hopefully, if time permits, we'll get to everybody's questions and get out some answers. Joining us for today's webcast, we have a really great conversational style webcast. We have two really great people joining us for today's webcast. You're going to hear from Max Kolomesev later on, he is sales engineer for StarWind Software, and prior to being sales engineer at StarWind Software, he was also their R&D engineer and the Q&A engineer. Max has a lot of experience. He's going to be talking today a little bit about what StarWind can do and some of their offerings, kind of a basic background of what StarWind can do. And don't forget to come back on Thursday for another portion of this webcast where Max will get a little more in-depth with some demos, so we'd appreciate that. But first up today, I'd like to welcome Greg Shields. Greg is a Microsoft MVP, a vExpert, and a CTP. He is an independent author, speaker, and IT consultant, as well as a partner and principal technologist with Concentrated Technology. With 15 years in information technology, Greg has developed expertise and experience in systems administration, engineering, and architecture. Greg is a highly sought-after and top-ranked speaker for both live and recorded events and is seen regularly at conferences like Tech Mentor events, Microsoft Tech Ed, VMworld, and the Microsoft Management Summit. His live and recorded sessions consistently receive top scoring with both technical and non-technical audiences, and Greg has produced over hundreds of hours of video training for TechTarget, 1105 Media, and others. With that, I'd like to introduce Greg so he can get started with today's program. So, Greg, why don't you take the floor and get today's webcast started?
Thank you, Chris. And that was a lot of emphasis on the word highly there. And I feel like we're kind of kicking off this webinar with a little bit of expectation here. Chris, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to yet another webinar here, sponsored by the Redmond Media Group and also sponsored by StarWind Software. Wow. We are here today to talk a little bit about storage, and in kind of a unique twist on our usual webinar format, the guys over at StarWind have happily agreed to put together a kind of part one, part two format for the content that we're going to discuss. And so today and then a little later on with the part two of this webinar, I think on Thursday of this week, we will get an opportunity to kind of really discuss the business level decisions you make as it relates to storage and remote office storage, and then also some of the real deep and dirty technical reasons why you might implement such things in your environment today. This webinar, the first of which, will talk more about some of the business level decisions and why remote office storage is kind of a weird, unique use case for a lot of different organizations, and figuring out exactly where you might put storage and how you might construct your storage can be a real challenge. In fact, I'll argue that your remote offices, your branch offices, which we can lovingly acronym together to ROBOs, your remote offices and your branch offices are kind of special creatures. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, in organizations where everyone is in a single location, building storage is something that, well, it's arguably a much different aspect. It's much easier to do. I put storage and it's available there. But when I have an organization that's distributed around to a lot of different locations, the storage conversation begins to get a little bit more complex, because those remote locations are not your main location. They are probably a location that is quite a bit smaller than your main location. It might just be a couple of people that have need for storage there. You might not even have an IT person there, or a heavy-duty IT infrastructure there. And so when you're talking about storage and deploying storage in those locations, simplicity is a key part of your design decision, because, well, you got to be able to provide the storage, but you want to do it in a way that maximizes the ability to keep the thing running when you aren't there on an everyday basis. The other thing that you want to consider is the fact that these, as I said, remote office locations they're not the main location. They're usually a smaller place, much more simplified needs, probably smaller in a geographic or the number of square footage or square meters that you have available. And so whatever storage you have available needs to also support just having a very small footprint for that location. I remember, if you remember back to the earliest of days when we're talking about storage area networks, I remember my very first terabyte, and it was the size, I think, of 3 different full-size refrigerators stacked back to back to back. And although the size of storage has diminished somewhat, the ability to dedicate a large amount of space for storing these sorts of things is just something you can't do in a robo situation. So figuring out how to design something that meets the simplicity requirement and meets the smallest possible hardware footprint is another thing that you have to think about when you're designing these things for those remote offices. But over and above all of this is this approach, this just feeling that can sometimes happen in ways in which we make decisions about remote offices, and that is this extra challenge in making storage available in a way that doesn't treat our users like second-class citizens. Right? All too often, we end up putting technologies in place that are awesome for the main office, but once they start pushing out to those remote offices or branch offices, well, they may not necessarily provide the kinds of just experience that I think our users are probably looking for. Now, with that introduction, I'm going to bring Max on the line. And Max is a sales engineer, as Chris said, with StarWind Software. And Max has spent a lot of years in really addressing some of the issues that people are dealing with as it relates to remote office storage. And he and the company StarWind Software have become very well known in the industry these days for putting together a kind of SAN that may be very different from the kinds of SANs you're used to thinking of. I mean, every time I walk around a conference floor and I see the different SANs that are out there, and these beautiful, large things that can store lots of stuff, and they're enterprise level. That's what I think of when I think of as a SAN. But the whole idea of what a SAN is, and much of the reason why we're here today, has less to do with just the impressive hardwareness of it. And in fact, with some of the technologies that are out there today, it is entirely possible to construct a SAN without hardware. So let's talk about that a bit. Max, thanks first and foremost for you and StarWind for taking the time to talk with us today.
Greg, thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. So our SANs are not the ones you can actually see. So our SANs are like nanoparticles, or I don't know, the invisible part of the storage.
I got to ask you though, Max. So the whole hook for this webinar was the fact that the SAN is hardwareless, but you still got to have a spinning disk somewhere or some sort of thing that captures the data that people are storing. Can you help me define or scope perhaps what you mean by hardwareless?
So basically, a hardwareless SAN is a solution which acts as a SAN but uses your existing hardware, let's say your commodity servers where your applications are running, and uses their local storage, their existing spinning disks they've already bought and they have it, and then they leverage their capabilities to a whole new level, providing the same set of servers you had before, high availability features, sharing features, snapshot features, and all the things you have with an enterprise SAN, but without that SAN at the same time. So you have zero additional hardware, and your SAN is basically virtualized inside your IT environment.
So a number of years ago, you and I were having a long conversation about what actually defines a SAN, what defines a storage area network. And I think it was you or one of the other guys over at StarWind mentioned to me that a SAN is, as you said, a bunch of just spinning disks and an operating system that sort of sits on top of them. And in some cases, the hardware SAN, the big old boxes that we think of as a traditional SAN, is sometimes little more than a version of Linux or even a version of Windows that is sort of closet sitting inside this big old box. And even though we may not recognize it because we can't see it directly, really it's a copy of Windows or a copy of Linux that's addressing all these individual hard drives. Is that kind of what you're describing here when you refer to, for example, the StarWind approach for creating a hardwareless SAN?
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically making your server and leveraging its capabilities. So it looks like a server, but technically it is a SAN.
Can you talk for a minute about some of the features that one can expect to see in the type of SAN that you define as hardwareless?
Let me see. So I guess all of the features today's SAN provides, plus one additional feature. StarWind allows you to go hyper-converged. So basically, inside of having dedicated layers in your data center, let's say you have a completely dedicated network layer, storage layer, and then you have your compute layer. You have just your compute layer and minimized networking layer. And everything else is virtualized within the servers, which are your main compute power. So it's less harder to maintain.
And one of the things that I think people are concerned about, too, when they're implementing SANs, whether it be for a main office or for a branch office, is, I mean, I can go buy a hard disk over at Best Buy or Walmart or any place that offers hard drives. I could buy a terabyte hard drive for, what, $80 these days US? I can buy a 2 and a 3 terabyte hard drive for, double or not even triple that price today. But when people are looking for the type of storage that they want for a business environment, I think they're thinking about storage, but they're also thinking about making sure that that storage is always there, like high availability, like having replicated copies of it, having the knowledge that if I lose one half of the SAN or if I lose one drive, it's not going to just destroy every piece of data that I have. If you're talking about using an existing Windows server that happens to sit in that remote office or branch office, how do I achieve some of those capabilities with the existing hardware that I have?
So with virtual SAN, we're not really talking making one server a SAN, but actually being capable of making every single server a SAN if that's necessary. So let's say you have 2 servers in your remote office. You install StarWind on both servers. Then what StarWind will do, it will mirror their storage. So if one server fails, second will continue to run. If that's not enough for the robo environment, we can easily scale on the fly to 3 servers, 4 servers, 5, and we've scaled beyond 64 servers. So that was the limit where Windows cluster actually ends up, and we haven't really tried scaling beyond that point with vSphere, but it is scalable on the fly. So if your robo boosts and you have a location which has much more people coming in, you can easily scale for that location needs. So it's not just a bunch of servers sitting there and you need to do a forklift upgrade if your location grows. It's an add-in scale out without downtime, without forklifts. You just add additional server and that's it.
Now, I know that you've got
highly available.
I know that you've got a couple of slides coming up here that are going to talk more about the virtual SAN architecture and just some of the things that people can expect with a technology like this. For those of you that are following along too, there is a Ask a Question box somewhere on your screen. And if you're interested in having a question for either myself or for Max, please feel free to drop that in the Ask a Question box, and we'll see if we can answer it either here during our quick back and forth or a little later on towards the end of this webinar as we get into the formal Q&A period. But until then, Max, I'm still thinking about this high availability. So if I have a bunch of machines that are sitting in a remote office somewhere and I link them together, are we talking about literally just putting network cards in servers and then connecting them with network cards? Are we using the existing network infrastructure? What's the kind of magic sauce that's going on behind the scenes in order to facilitate this high availability?
So as for the networking, we do not really require any specific network equipment, so no proprietary switches like fiber channel and stuff like that. It's regular Ethernet It's just a separated network, so you do not mix your storage network and your local area network. And for some scenarios, it may be a 10 gigabit environment. But since it's an isolated environment, you can easily go switchless. So it's basically plus, let's say, $500 for a 2-port 10 gig adapter in each server, and you have your high availability there. It all runs backend through these 10 gigabit cables, and this is completely sufficient to have your 2, 3, or 4 servers act as a single compute resource and being completely fault tolerant. So if any of those fail, or if the disk drive fails, you don't really need to drive there as soon as possible to change that disk, because you know that high availability is working and your virtual machine is actually restarted on the other server and your remote location continues to run.
How does this end up looking from the consumer's perspective? So I'm a person that needs to access a resource that happens to be in that storage that you've created. Do I have to change how I connect to the resource, or is everything pretty well transparently configured under the covers?
It's completely transparent for the end user, since end user does not see the storage part of the story. It sees his virtual machines, his applications, and stuff like that. It's Hyper-V which actually sees that storage has moved from somewhere, or just sees that one server is down and uses another server. So in backend, StarWind allows Hyper-V to see that storage continuously. Even if something fails, Hyper-V just thinks that the storage is still there. So even for Hyper-V, it looks comprehensive and transparent. There is no need to switch things manually or write failover in command line and then it will failover. It's just about using application. Then somebody goes from the server room and says, okay, one of the servers failed, and you ask, why? Everything's working. He said, well, high availability is working. That's why our location is still online.
So we've got a person who's watching this presentation, Ari, who's just popped in a little question, and I think he needs to be convinced, because he wants us to talk a bit about some of the performance expectations that we might see from a SAN like what we're talking about here. Can you talk a bit about the performance of a SAN? Is this something that's going to be close to native? Is there a performance tax to be paid in setting up these multiple server environments?
Actually, with the new version we have just released, the performance tax is actually rebate, because installing StarWind and assigning virtualized workload to it actually boosts the performance of the local server. So we have a new file system which eliminates traditional I/O blender, which kills conventional storage systems, and we use it for our good, just writing all the stuff sequentially and keeping a structured copy on flash storage. So that's not supposed to be an enterprise flash drive. It's just standard, let's say, SATA MLC drive. But this allows you to get as much as 2,000 IOPS from a system with one SSD drive and one desktop SATA drive. That's what I've got in my lab with just standard equipment and stuff I try to get from our system admin. If we put it on our servers, it completely maxes out 10 gigabit Ethernet under most workloads, and that's just fantastic. I mean, we're getting the performance of flash-based storage without actually having flash-based storage.
And you mentioned just desktop-based flash storage, because I know that one of the biggest problems with flash storage is, I can go buy a flash drive for my desktop for a couple $100, but once I start getting into some of the enterprise class flash storage, we're talking quite a bit more than that, a mini multiplier of that couple $100. So if I'm hearing what you're saying, in order to facilitate this, there is a flash acceleration that occurs and can occur on some more commodities type or even consumer grade flash storage. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So taking into account that our systems are duplicated and redundant, we have a flash drive in each server, and we synchronize that information kept in flash. So if one MLC drive fails, StarWind will just redirect that I/O to another server, or just pretend one of the layers is not available and will continue running. Another thing is that our new file system is also flash friendly. So what we're doing behind the scenes, we're not only structuring the data, but also deduplicating it on the fly. So this means that the data which hits your flash drives and the data which hits your RAM is reduced. And this allows you to keep more of your mission-critical data on the faster storage. And at the same time, lessen the wear out of your expensive and fast drives.
So one of the questions that did pop up here also is from Larry, and Larry wants to know about the bandwidth requirements in order to facilitate replication. You talked about 10 gig, but is 10 gig an absolute requirement? Is there other configurations that we can lay into place to accomplish that replication?
That's not an absolute requirement, and it's not mandatory. So depending on the configuration and depending on your load, you can go with 1 gigabit Ethernet, then just stack it to get like 3, 4, 5 gigabit Ethernet. Or if your robo environment is not really a robo but a fully functional office, then you can even scale to 40 gigabit Ethernet, and it will be scalable further as technology develops.
Does the technology support deduplication? I mean, if I've got a lot of files out there, to be able to take that large number of files and compress them into a smaller number of files is going to definitely help me with storage space. But also, deduplication can help too, I would think, with IOPS as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's exactly what we do with our new file system. We deduplicate the data, and the less data, like effective data you have, the better it fits to your layer 1, which is your RAM cache, and layer 2, which is your flash cache. And this is what accelerates your IOPS. So not just using the SATA drives or SAS backend for your storage, but trying to have all the data fit into the faster tiers of storage without actually expanding those tiers, but making the data structured and packed well. It even allows users to go with in-memory computing if they have enough RAM in their boxes. It just deduplicates all the virtual machines you have, and they basically pinpoint it to memory.
So, and for those of you, again, if you've got questions for either Max or myself, feel free to drop them in the Ask a Question box on your screen. Max, I know you and I have another one of these webinars coming up here in a couple of days that's going to talk very specifically about the technical underpinnings of this technology that we're talking about here. But I know here, at least at this point, that you've got a couple of slides that talk about the StarWind approach to hardware-based SANs. I think people that are here on the line may have an interest in taking a look at. Would you be interested in kind of showing us some of the slides that you brought?
Yeah, definitely. So first thing that I wanted to say that in StarWind, we're trying to fight with this kind of robo-IT environment. So this is what we're trying to organize and look as big as, let's say, 3 servers on the bottom rack. So as for StarWind itself, here is a slide which shows the basic principle and few things about the software. The standard software which works on Windows is much more comprehensive to users than any type of dedicated storage or non-Windows type of storage, because in the robo locations, I doubt that you have specific specialized management stuff for your IT environment. So it needs to be as simple as possible and as reliable as possible as well. Another thing is that by using just the servers we have and not expanding everything, we dramatically reduce our CapEx and OpEx. So we don't buy extra stuff if we need it, and we leverage the capabilities of our existing equipment. So we don't have a lot of hardware to manage, less hardware going end of life, and less support contracts, which rise from year to year, as it is normal in the enterprise market. One more thing is that StarWind allows to build this setup for the entire robo environment with just 2 servers, and this gives a 360 feature set from the storage point of view. So this setup provides you with both high availability and virtualization capabilities. It also covers your backups by doing either remote replication to your main site or doing virtual tape backups. So you basically get everything in one box. You don't really need to buy stuff from different vendors. Just buy the servers, buy the operating system, buy the software, and you're all set. And really, this configuration can be configured, I would say, under 3 hours. If you have the servers ready and mounted into the rack, there are no special skills required to build it. And even if you have questions, StarWind offers free installation assistance with every purchase. So you can call StarWind engineers, and guys will just help you to set up this config according to your best practices. Let's take a look. We have a lot of questions coming in. Okay, so far everything's covered. Yeah, so I guess that's it. To conclude, my part about virtual SAN is virtualizing your storage environment and making it hyper-converged, doing a unified storage and compute environment, gives you less hardware to maintain, thus the operating expenses are dramatically minimized. Like if you have 100 remote locations, you simplify 100 locations, your expenses go down dramatically. One more thing StarWind provides to robos is the maximum IT flexibility, where you can install 2 servers, and then depending on your business needs and how your business grows, you add additional servers, you grow the configuration, just like scale out. So instead of just upgrading individual servers, you expand it and still have a unified resource pool which continues to work, and the performance it gives you increases as you grow. So it doesn't really stay the same as with conventional scale-up storage models. It increases according to your needs, and it really fits them much easily. And as I said, StarWind offers a 360 storage feature set where one product suite gives you storage high availability for your virtual machines and your applications. It also gives you backup capabilities, remote replication capabilities, and it virtualizes a tape library to give you an option to back up to standard SATA drives. And then if tape backup is mandatory, you can use tape. If it's not mandatory, you can always use deduplicated storage to store all your backups and not spend money on proprietary tape equipment in each robo location.
All right, thanks, Max. Much appreciated. Thank you for your presentation, and Greg, thank you as well. For those of you in the audience, if you have a question, we'll give Greg and Max here a second to just catch their breath for a second. If you have a question, please feel free to enter it in the Ask a Question box appearing on the left-hand side of your screen. Fill out the empty area. Hit the submit button. It'll be sent off to Greg and Max, and they'll try to get to some people's questions. And also, don't forget, I had a couple people ask here. The webcast will be archived, so you'll be able to get a link within 24 to 48 hours where you can find the replay version of the webcast. So for the people that asked that, just keep an eye out on your inbox. All right, so Greg, I'll hand it back to you. You can get started with some Q&A questions.
Yeah, thank you. And so, Max, I've got a couple of questions that are coming in. I'm going to consolidate, just to kick things off, I'm going to consolidate a couple of the questions here that I see from Larry and from George. And I think their questions have to do with just maybe a little bit of a clarification in terms of where the StarWind SAN, all the pieces of the StarWind SAN would be deployed in a sort of characteristic implementation. When a person is implementing a StarWind SAN in a remote office location, are they bridging that link between the main office and the remote office, or are they including all the pieces of that remote office SAN in the remote office itself?
That's actually just remote office. So the things they're linking with the main office may be the replication links if they run disaster recovery replicas to the main site, or they have mandatory replication to their main site. But the SAN inside the mobile location is pretty much self-sufficient.
So when a person is implementing this, just to see if I can just understand this for myself, but a person's implementing this in their remote office, when I'm taking the existing hardware that exists in that remote office and linking it together to create that sort of multi-server, highly available environment, in addition to that functionality, there is also the ability to then synchronize or to replicate the contents of that SAN perhaps back to your main office location for purposes of backup or for archival. Am I correct?
Yeah. That's absolutely correct. So with the new version we have released, we now support WAN replication, so it can use T1, 1, 2, 3 megs lines to replicate it one way to your disaster recovery site. And what it also does, it replicates the data which is deduplicated. So it utilizes the link more effectively than just pushing raw data through it.
Can you talk a bit about any integration with monitoring tools? Oleg has a question about whether or not when you set up a StarWind-based SAN, if there's the ability to monitor the SAN or monitor its different characteristics and behaviors.
Yeah, there is a monitor inside StarWind Management Console which allows you to see how StarWind feels, what's the duplication ratios on the drives, what's the storage utilization right now, and what are the IOPS. And another thing we have is, of course, event log and email notifications to the system administrator if something goes wrong. So we do not have integrated tools for monitoring yet, so you will not be able to monitor StarWind directly from vCenter, but we provide a quite feature-rich monitoring tool within our management console.
Got a question here from Jeremy. So can you explain a bit about when a person purchases StarWind or incorporates StarWind, what does it look like? What does it touch and feel like? Is this its own operating system running on top of the hardware? Is it integrated into the hypervisor OS? Is it an application that sits on top? What is the actual bits and bytes that a person can expect to receive?
Okay, so with StarWind, it's just a Windows application, so that's how it looks and feels. You install it just, as you install Skype or, let's say, Microsoft Office and any software. So it's just a simple wizard. You click through it, and you've got the software installed. And then it simply works as a standard Windows application. So it's much more simple looking than people expect it to be. Because in many cases, I had situations where people were asking, is it that simple? And I said, yeah, storage should not be that complex. He said, okay, where is this zoning? Where is this creepy fiber channel stuff? I said, no, sir. It's just simple as that. You've got your wizards to create storage. You've got your management console, and it is as convenient as, let's say, Hyper-V management console or vCenter management.
I've got a great question here from Rob. And so we built into Windows itself are a variety of different storage technologies. One of the ones Rob mentions here is, for example, Hyper-V replication. Can you talk a bit about the value add that one gets in layering a StarWind on top of some of these existing Windows technologies?
Yeah, so StarWind provides a great add-on for existing Hyper-V capabilities. Like Hyper-V Replica is a great feature, but in some scenarios, customers cannot really afford downtime and data loss. So I'm not really talking about complete data loss. Let's just pretend Hyper-V Replication is used for disaster recovery mostly. And if your primary server fails, the replica gets online within 20 minutes, and the recovery point objective may vary from minutes to tens of minutes. What StarWind adds to this capability is an option to have your recovery time objective equal to the time the server needs to restart in the partner node, and recovery point objective equals 0. So essentially, no data loss at all. So it's not just a replication. Yeah.
Oh, please continue.
Yeah. So it's not just a replication. It's more of a fault tolerance brought to your storage.
So one question here from Atishan, who wanted to know about any support for Linux operating systems.
We do not run on Linux operating systems, but StarWind can be launched as a virtual machine. So customers who use, let's say, Citrix Xen, or other hypervisors can launch StarWind as a virtual machine. And I guess our R&D and Q&A will be actually interested in these customers, in these use cases, because we do support VMware, but we haven't done much testing on the Xen side. So if someone would like to roll out a virtualized Xen on other hypervisors, this is also possible.
So this is, as I said earlier, the first of a two-part series here on just the business use cases and also some of the technical underpinnings of hardwareless SANs. We got one final question here, Max. It's come in the queue from Mary Beth, who wants to know, does StarWind offer demos, or what kinds of other things can a person, or where can a person go to if they want to learn more about StarWind between now and the next of these two presentations?
I see. So first of all, we do offer demos. In some cases, we can either let our clients remote into our test bed and test StarWind in our lab without need to configure it in their environment. And if the person wants to download and evaluate StarWind, you can always go to our website and download the free 30-day trial. This is a fully functional version, which gives you 30 days to play with the software, look how it works, if it works for you, what are the benefits it gives you, what is the value you can get for your IT environment by implementing it. And during those 30 days, our technical staff will be there to help you and answer your questions. So this will be pretty much like a demo on our side, but conducted in their own lab.
And they grab that from your website. Can you give us your website?
Of course, it's starwind.com.
Well, Max, thank you, and also thanks to StarWind for sponsoring this first of two webinars on the hardware-less SAN approach to implementing storage for remote offices and branch offices. We got one more part coming up here a little later this week on Thursday, where we'll dig a little further into the technical underpinnings of this technology and some of the ways in which it accomplishes many of the things that we've talked about here. I want to thank Max again. I want to thank StarWind and also all of you for spending some time out of your day to talk with us about some of the new approaches in hardware-less SANs. With that, I'll turn things back over to Chris for some closing thoughts. Chris?
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg and Max. Thank you guys for taking time out of your busy days to join us. Much appreciated there. And to everybody in the audience, thank you for joining us. Don't forget, keep an eye on the emails in your inbox coming for the replay. It'll contain a link to part 2 of this webcast series that happens on Thursday, June 5th. So keep an eye out for that. It'll contain a link that contains registration for the next part of the webcast. So please, everybody, tune in on Thursday and join us for that. But thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks, everybody.